Here in number 73, we're supposed to simplify the cube root of 512. Okay, now what we're looking for is this. We are looking for a number that when we raise it to the third power, we get 512. That's the meaning of this. It says, this is some number, okay? This is some number. We don't know what it is right away, but we'll have to work at it. But that represents some number. This whole thing is a number. What number is it? It's the number. This whole thing is this number right here. And it's the number that when we raise it to the third power, we get 512. So we have to make some guesses here. Now in textbooks and exercises, these numbers are not going to be real big. So you can make some guesses. You can guess 1. Well, 1 cubed is 1. 2 cubed is 8. 3 cubed is 27. 4 cubed, 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. 5 cubed, 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. So you keep going. This one turns out to be 8. So we're going to claim now that the cube root of 512 is 8. Now in problem number 111, we're going to simplify the square root of 13 squared. Let me just write this so it's more explicit. Right now, it doesn't look like there's an index there, but when there's no index, no number here, the number in the corner is called an index. When there's no number there, it's assumed to be a 2. So what this signifies is 2, 13 squared. Now, here's how we could look at this. Here's kind of the evolution of this. You start with 13, right? Here's our 13. We start with 13. Then we square it. Then we take the square root. Now, because 13 is positive, what we get is this. The square undoes the square root. You start with 13, you square it, you square root it. We're right back where we started, so we get 13. Another way that we could do this would be this. If you have the square root of 13 squared, well, we could go ahead and square this. We'll get 169, and then the square root of 169 is 13. So we get 13 either way. Now, in 113, we're going to simplify the square root of negative 7 squared. Now, we have to be a little bit careful. Let's just, while we're here, let's look back down to this one here. You see what we have here? We have the square root of 13 squared, and we just got 13, right? We just get that base. Well, we're not going to get that here. Let's look at this. Okay, what I want to say here is that this is not equal to negative 7. 2 reasons. First of all, we know that the square root represents a positive number, and this is not positive. Let's look at what's going on here. If we actually do this one like this, okay, so we're going to get the square root of negative 7 squared. Here's how this evolves. Well, let's just do this. This will be the square root, negative 7 squared, 49. Square root of 49 is 7. And sure enough, because we have the radical on here indicating the positive root, here is the positive root. You know, I think this is a good time to talk about a general idea here. So let's just talk about this general idea about taking these square roots. Since we just worked with this one here, let's try this. Let's go with both 7 and negative 7, and then let's do this. Let's square them. Okay, and then we'll square root. Now in this case, we get the square root of 49. Actually, let's do both of those. Let's take it a step further. So we'll get the square root of 49. Over here, we also get the square root of 49. In the left side column, we get 7. In this column, we get 7. Now, look what happened here. We started with a positive number, and we ended up with exactly that number. We started with a positive number, squared it, square rooted it, and we got that number back. Start with 7, we get 7. But over here, we started with a negative number, and we ended up with a positive number. So it turned out that when we started with a negative, we squared it, but squaring turns it to a positive, and that changes our result to a positive here. So a general rule would say something like this. we could say, let's say it this way here. If x is any number, then the square root of x squared. Now, what are we going to write over here? Well, we can't just write x, because if x is positive, we get x back, right? If x is 7, we got 7. But if x is negative 7, we don't get 7 back. Negative 7 back, we get 7. So we either get the exact same number or we get the opposite, right? 7 is the opposite of negative 7. So what we're going to write here instead to make this thing work is this. We're going to write this as the absolute value of x. So let's try a couple of things and see exactly how to read this thing. So I'll do it up here at the top. So if we start with, well, let's start with 7. And if we square it and square root it, okay, what we're doing here is we're going to get the absolute value of 7, and the absolute value of 7 is 7. But if we start with this one, negative 7 squared, square root that, we're going to get the absolute value of negative 7, right? The negative 7. And the absolute value of negative 7 is 7. So putting this absolute value on here ensures that we're going to get this positive number back, right? Because the absolute value of any number is positive. So what this means for us is this, is that if we don't know what the number is, if we don't know that it's positive or negative, I'm going to go down here to this bottom, this part right here. If you choose some number x, if you don't know what x is, it could be positive, it could be negative. When you take the square root, you're going to have to get the absolute value of x. So you start with any number, square it, square root it. You got to get a positive out, so you're going to write it as the absolute value of x. Let's do another one. What if we do this one here? Let's take the square root of 10 squared. That would be the absolute value of 10, which is 10. But if we take the square root of negative 10 squared, we're going to get the absolute value of negative 10, which is 10. And now, how about this one? What if we take the square root of y squared, and we don't know anything about y? This y could be any number at all. It could be a positive number like 10 or 7, or it could be a negative number like negative 10 or negative 7. So since we don't know if y is positive or negative, here's the best we can do. We'll write the absolute value of y, and we have to leave it at that. That's the best we're able to do. Now in number 115, this is a little bit different than what we just did up here, because this was a square root. That's an even root. We've got an odd root here. So what's going to happen? Let's just run through this one. Let's just compute it. This is going to be the fifth root of, now, negative 1 to the fifth. Negative 1 5 times. That's negative 1. And now we're looking for this. What number would you raise to the fifth power, right? What number would we raise to that fifth power to get negative 1, right? So we're going to make a guess here. It's not too hard to guess this one. What do you think you're going to put in here? We're going to put in a negative 1. So what we're going to say here then is that the fifth root of negative 1 to the fifth is negative 1.